Making Monsters with Taylor Dahl. It's like beer and brats, a perfect combination.
You know the deal.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Making Monsters. We're kind of starting to wrap up this offseason podcast, the 9th pick and beyond, where we're talking about some potential draft picks the Bears may select at 9, or maybe if they trade back 11, 12, 13. There's some chatter about that and who they may be able to select there. So I figured we'd go ahead and talk some Seminoles, because there's a couple that I like personally. There's a couple that have kind of been in some mocks for the Bears. So I'm bringing in Tony Wiggins. I call him T-Wig. He's technically the host of Locked On Jaguars and a bunch of other stuff, but diehard Nole, really in with that organization. So T-Wig, thanks for joining me. Hey man, I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate it. And I know we've about 9 years ago, actually, I started interning at 1010, and Midday Chalk was the first show I worked with. So you were one of the first people that kind of like introduced me to the industry. And so I appreciate that, because now 9 years later, I'm hosting a midday show. So that's definitely a big step up.
It is a big step up. And I talked to you about that before we came on air. There was no bigger fan of Taylor Dahl than me. Well, maybe one other person, but there was no bigger fan of Taylor Dahl. And I'm like, y'all think y'all know sports. I used to always say this too to my friends. I got a girl that'll come in here and weigh y'all out. She'll give you, she'll run circles around you. So fortunately, I never had to pull that card, but I'm real happy for you.
Well, thank you. Let's go ahead and jump into, I want to talk about Jared Verse. Let's start there. Verse started his career at Albany, ended up switching, transferring to Florida State. That first year, the first year he was there, 15 games with Florida State. He had, in 2022, 12 games, 9 starts there, 48 tackles, 17 for loss, 9 sacks. So pretty much right out the gate with the Noles. You were saying what Jared Verse could be for that defense. So tell us a little bit about that first year, and was that something you guys were expecting from him right away?
I thought he was going to be more of a project. I had no idea he was going to be as good as he was. At first, for early on, people were like, yeah, he's good, but he's not as good as JJ. That's Jermaine Johnson, who had preceded him. He ended up probably being better than Jermaine Johnson. He's thought of as a higher draft selection for one. Then he's younger, but he's a very, very good player. I was just shocked that he was that coordinated and that physical coming from a smaller school. Of course, we all gained some COVID weight. I'm sure he gained his a little bit differently than the average guy like me, but he looked like a ready-made player from any SEC school, Florida State, Clemson, whatever. He looked like he had been there the whole time and did not miss a beat. Really transfers speed to power as well as anybody I've seen in college for a long time.
And that's definitely one of the things you hear a lot about him. And in the scouting reports, that's a phrase they use often, is that speed to power. And it's definitely something you want to see on defensive linemen, but especially your edges. 2023, T-Wig, unfortunately for the Noles, lost their quarterback. A lot of people were real upset that they didn't make the playoff because of that situation, because from top to bottom, you felt like that roster was performing out of their minds last season. And this is including Jared Verse. Started those first 13 games, 41 tackles, 12.5 for loss, 9 sacks, 11 hurries, 3 pass breakups, forced fumble. So when you see all of those numbers, it's not like Jared Verse was just sitting there on the edge rushing the passer and solely doing that. You were seeing him all over the football field. So what about that? What all did the Noles do with him, especially this last season?
They moved him around enough that you would envision him playing over the right tackle. You would envision him playing a strong side, and you'd envision him in a 9 wide role. He can basically do both. So if there was a comp for him, so with the Bears, he's not as long and angular as Montez Sweat. That's not what he is. But if you think about with the Bengals, you think about Trey Hendrickson, somebody like that. He is a little bit more compact. He doesn't have length issues. He's quick. He can play the run. He's extremely active. And he doesn't quit after that first move. Too many times we see young guys when they get into the NFL, they got that one little signature move, and then once it's thwarted, they're just like, okay, what do I do now? I'll do something else. No, he keeps fighting and he keeps going and he keeps clawing. And that's why they talk about his motor so much, because even if the initial move doesn't work, he has another one, and then he'll have another one. So it's not going to be like he's going to let offensive linemen off the hook after they stop him on that first move. he's going to learn, and he's going to be one of those dudes that actually plays the game a little bit older than his mind, because when you see him work, he looks like a guy that loves the process. And I talk about that a lot, because in the NFL, you play 17 games. You play more than that if you're lucky, but that's 3 hours. So if you play offense or defense, that's half. So that's 1.5 hours every week, and you only get to do it 17 times. You got to love people that love to put in the work and believe that they're getting paid to practice, because that's what they're going to be doing way more than anything else. And he's a guy that absolutely loves that process. And that's why I think he's going to be a good pro.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of the mindset and why Florida State's been able to flip, because that's been what Norvell's brought to Florida State this last few years that he's been there.
Keep climbing. That's the motto, right? They just don't quit. And he doesn't allow them to take plays off, doesn't allow them to take any situation for granted. And I'm sure them getting left out of the playoffs, I saw him stare over at them, because I'm sure what he told them is what we've always heard. You take care of the process, and the process will take care of you. And he had to look at him and say, I let you down and I lied. See, what Florida State fans wanted to see, they wanted to see them have the shot that a team like Michigan wasn't going to throw the ball all around the field. Yeah. The fact is that because it was an identity change, it doesn't mean that Florida State wasn't worthy to be there. You saw at the combine, all of the guys that didn't play, and then there's 3 or 4 more that's still at Florida State. They opted out too to go ahead and have minor procedures done. There's about 15 guys that Florida State believes would have made that a lot different.
Yeah, I feel like they had the most there. Wasn't it like 17 or something like that? 17.
Yeah, I think the number was 17. And then they had some people that didn't get invited. And all of their guys did well. Even Keon Coleman, he didn't run a great 40 time, but he did well in the gauntlet. And you saw his real speed and the rest of the athletic drills. So it's just like Florida State just has this whole team full of dudes up there to draft, and they were all doing so well that the Florida State fans, look, I ain't saying we would have beat Georgia, but we wouldn't have lost by 60.
No, I don't think so either. I was honestly, I was bummed, and I think a lot of people were for the Noles, unless you're a Gator. The Gators had their kind of excuse and SEC homer, SEC rules the nation type stuff. But another thing also that I feel like maybe a lot of people don't know about Jared Verse, these last 2 seasons, he's had a blocked field goal and a blocked kick in both of these games too. So that also, I think, is one of the things that kind of shows his speed and just where you can see him everywhere on the football field.
That's that Johnny on the spot. That's I'm just going to work, and I'm going to keep going. You know who would love him? Dan Campbell would love him. And I know y'all don't want to hear this on the Bears podcast, but he is literally going to continue to try to eat kneecaps until the whistle's blown. And that's exactly how he is. That's why even if there's some personnel dude sitting up there being nitpicky about Jared Verse, I guarantee you a position coach ain't doing it, because coaches love guys like that. And a place like Chicago, where they will fall in love with a hard worker. They will fall in love with a dude that wears everything on his sleeve and plays with a lot of emotion. Chicago and Philly are 2 places they love guys like that. He would be a great fit, in my opinion, for the Bears, and would go a long way in recreating the monsters of the Midway to a certain extent.
Yeah, I like it. And that's what, it's funny that you said that, because obviously we just had this offseason, T-Wig, of like very split down the middle of keep Justin Fields, build around Justin Fields, and then the camp that was like, no, go draft Caleb Williams. You have this opportunity to get someone number 1 overall. And the Bears don't have the number 1 pick because they were terrible last year. The Bears have the number 1 pick because of that trade with Carolina. So it's a very different and like unique circumstance. But to your point of how Chicago rallies around their guys, Justin Fields definitely by far did not have this big voluptuous career where everything went perfect. There was a lot of mistakes on his end, a lot of mistakes around, but he was a hard worker. You saw him the first one on the field, first one off the field when it came to practice, and people loved that. They embraced it in Chicago. So to your point in that, I think that they would love a guy like Jared Verse. One thing, T-Wig, to me, I've even been, and this has shocked a few people me saying this, because I feel like the Bears even would like the fit and just the type of player that Jared Verse is over even Dallas Turner. So I've been very pro get Jared Verse over Dallas Turner just because of the fit in Chicago. And I like the way he can do a little bit of everything, like we just mentioned, and like being able to set the edge and help with the run. That's just such a masterpiece when it comes to Chicago being able to do that. So is that some of your feelings of him being able to fit there?
Yeah, I do. I absolutely think he's fit. I mentioned Montez Sweat. I think it'd be a disaster to have Dallas Turner and Montez Sweat on the same team. And that's because teams will go, let's run the ball. And it doesn't mean that both of them can't stop the run, but you're asking a lot of those guys to continuously stop the run when people know they're going to be on the field at the same time. Yeah. I do believe Jared Verse is a more stout and allows them, and I know the scale won't say it. The scale says one dude is 6'3", 248, and the scale says the other dude is 6'3", 254. But there's a difference in body style. There's also a difference in play. And I think Dallas Turner is a dude that needs to move around a little bit and probably play in a true 3-4. Even you can see him standing up in the middle in a lightning package in the A-gap. I think Jared Verse, if you need him to be the speed rusher, could play opposite of a big guy and be the speed rusher. He can also be, okay, you don't need me to be the speed rusher. You need to be lining me up in the 4-eye, which is directly in front of the tackle, and we need to do more edge setting. Well, I can do that too. So that's what I really, really think he is. I think it's all about fit in the NFL. Sometimes it's not about taking the highest ranked player. Sometimes it's about taking the player that is best made for you and your ball club. And I think he's a better fit than Dallas is.
I agree. And a name that you're familiar with that they picked up last year in Yannick Ngakoue. That was my concern all offseason when they were talking about Jan was like, great, he can get to the quarterback. We know that, but he's terrible against the run. And we saw that last year. And even like throughout the season, it's not like they weren't terrible against the run. They figured some other stuff out. Some of those interior guys stepped up, Javon Dexter, some of those guys, but it still, I felt like they had the opportunity to be even better. And if you had a guy, like you said, like Jared Verse across from Montez Sweat, someone that they are scared to run the ball, but they're also scared to pass the ball. They don't have time to pass the ball. That just adds so many levels of teams being able to like fear your defense on all levels.
You're right. And it also makes it hard for them to play call with a dude that is every down. You get small guys in there, they want to go jumbo on you and bring the tight end down and make life, and playing bunch formations make life real hard for you. They don't have the luxury of doing that with a guy that's an every down player. You really got to make sure that you keep it trump tight and just call a good game. And I like the fact that he represents a dude that while he might not be the best pass rusher, he might not be the best run stuffer, what he does represent is, if you're playing poker, you don't know what to do because he doesn't have a weakness. He just may not be as good at somebody else at certain things, but he can do everything. And I think he'd be a very, very good fit. He's a cold weather player too. Right. And he's used to it from being up, he's from the upstate New York.
Which, you're going to have to get used to it when you're in Chicago, even though maybe eventually we'll have a dome. Who knows how long that'll take to figure out. But right now it's cold and it's windy in a lot of those months. And some of those guys, it was interesting because last year when I was doing some of the same, they drafted Tyreek Stevenson from Miami. And he left Georgia to go to Miami because he said it was too cold in Georgia. And I was like, oh, no. But he played really well last season. So he figured out the cold or just tuned it out. One more before we move on to Keon Coleman, because I do want to talk about him a little bit. But to attest to kind of what you were talking about with Jared Verse and his personality and his love for football, he also could have left last year and probably been a first-round pick, and he stayed. What were his reasonings, you think, for staying? Was it because he felt like they had something in Tallahassee?
I think he thought they were going to contend and win for a national and play for a national championship. And a lot of people still believe, whether you think they did, it's not about deserved. It's about earned. A lot of people don't get what they deserve. You know what I mean? And sometimes when you earn something, if you're undefeated from a Power 5 conference, by the way, in the last 11 years, that conference has won 3 championships. Clemson won 2 and Florida State won 1 in the last 11 years. So it's not as if they don't have a track record of putting out a really, really good team at the end of the year. And Florida State, before the Georgia game, had won like 19 games in a row. So all of those kids came back. There were a bunch of them that could possibly have tested the waters last year. They came back only to be told that they weren't going to even get an opportunity. And I think most of them, I believe they took it upon themselves to make sure when they went to that combine, they let everybody know, just in case you forgot, this is who we were when we lined up on the field this year.
Yeah, and speaking of that, because Keon Coleman's a name I just mentioned, and Keon Coleman, another transferred last year to Florida State. It's another thing. That's one thing Norvell's been really good at. that maybe Florida State struggled with in the past is now taking advantage of the transfer portal. But unfortunately, like I mentioned, Jordan Travis got hurt, and there were certain pieces of that offense that maybe didn't click the way all season you thought it was going to because he wasn't there. He still had 11 touchdowns, almost 700 yards. Tell us a little bit about Keon's role on the offense last year.
So Keon came in, and the very first game against LSU, he had 3 touchdowns. I mean, he was amazing, right? Then he had some spectacular catches and spectacular plays. They were spread out a little bit, but he was also the punt returner. So to give you all of this at 6'3", 215 pounds, for him to be the punt returner, it's because Florida State, for some reason, had 2,975 guys on the roster, and they didn't have one dude that knew how to return punts, right? For like 3 years in a row. So he comes in and he's the punt returner. What happened was, it was a pickup basketball game at Norvell's house the weekend that he got here. And I think what Norvell looked at and saw him dunking the ball all different kinds of ways and said, you know, if we were playing kickball, if we were playing pickleball, if we were playing jump rope or double dutch, I don't care what we were playing, I pick him first. So that shows you why he was the punt returner. He was very dangerous at it. He's the type of guy, when he walks into the room, regardless of what you're playing, you're picking him first because he gives off that aura. Now the offense was sort of designed to take advantage of one-on-one ability with him and Johnny Wilson, who was 6'6", and Jaheim Bell, who's going to get drafted and be a Swiss Army knife for somebody. The offense was really built to get one-on-one situations and just throw the ball up and let them go for it. And I don't mean to talk bad about Jordan Travis, or I don't mean to talk bad about Norvell's offense, but that's pretty much what it was. So there's some clunkers in there. There's some games when they were a little bit off because he was a late transfer. And then he also missed some practice time when he got banged up. They never really got a chance to get on that roll that they wanted to get on. And then Jordan got hurt with 3 games left. Maybe he could have gone over 1,000 yards and had a better showing in these bigger games. But now you got a quarterback who had to play. Well, their backup quarterback played. He got concussed, and then he decided to transfer. So now you got a third stringer who wasn't an early enrollee, was not an early enrollee, and he missed 6 weeks of practice during the regular season. The kid practiced about 5 weeks, and he had just come out of high school. There was no way they were going to look good in an ACC championship game. So shame on those people for looking at that and not saying, you know what, we're going to let them play and give them an opportunity, because had they done that, that redshirt junior quarterback we had, he would have stayed. He wouldn't have left. And he would have stayed to have a chance to play in that game, and it just didn't happen. But Keon's season was up and down because of lack of familiarity. And then once people got used to him and started to understand what he was going to do, that's around the time that things got clunky in the offense, and then Jordan Travis ended up getting a little bit hurt. But mark my word, even if he is not day one in somebody's starting lineup, by the middle of the season, he's going to do something, and people are going to go, he has to play more. And you're going to slowly see him start to get into the offense. By year 2, he's going to be a household name in the National Football League.
Which honestly may be a perfect scenario for the Bears, because the Bears, obviously DJ Moore, but just got Keenan Allen. Right now it's for a 1-year deal. But for a guy like Keon Coleman to come into an offense where right now, maybe this year he'd be a 3, but like you just said, get some experience, learn from Keenan and DJ a little bit, then next year take over that wide receiver 2 role. I feel like what sounds ideal, but what type of receiver would you see he is a fit in the NFL? Because he's pretty big, right?
He's a big guy. I saw somebody comp him to Brandon Marshall. I don't think he's that big.
Okay.
I comp him a lot to Des Bryant, who is about, they're athletic. They're 4'5"-ish guys, but they seem to play a lot faster. And they just seem like those dudes. Just like I said, you get him in one-on-one situations, especially running across. He can actually play in the slot too. He can he's a pure X receiver in my opinion. But if you need him to play in the slot, just like I told you, they had him returning punch, doing screen passes. I think he tried to throw the ball too last year. And if you think about it, he played, and when he was at Michigan State before he transferred to Florida State, he was on Tom Izzo's basketball team. That's just how good he is.
Yeah.
So once he zoomed in on football, he picked it up really, really quick. I just think he's a dude that just snatches the ball out of the air. If you want to look at more of a modern player who's still playing, maybe Cortland Sutton. He's sort of in that. Not quite Mike Williams, because Mike Williams is one of the best at jump balls I've ever seen. Yeah. But maybe a Cortland Sutton, somebody who really does use that size and they have really, really sneaky speed and can get behind you. And if he does, it's good night. He can go all the way to the house with it.
So speaking of, because obviously you talked about that punt return, some of the things he did, there's a new rule this year when it comes to the kickoffs. And is that something he could possibly take advantage of? If he was
I wouldn't do that if I was in the NFL.
Okay.
I don't like tall return guys, with the exception of Cordero Patterson. That's about it. Everybody else, I like them 6'1" or smaller. I think the new rules are going to favor the running backs. I actually think that's one of the reasons they got paid so much. Because, last year they were talking about, why ain't nobody paying running backs? And all of a sudden this year, everybody's starting to pay these running backs, right?
Yeah.
I really do believe the kickoff rules are going to benefit the running back, and they had to figure out a way to make the running back position more viable. So who is used to running in short spaces where there's a lot of crowded people? Running backs. Yeah. I think that's why they're going to benefit. And I also believe that was a reason that they bumped those. They could justify giving them the money now. I think, in my opinion, I'll stick to it until somebody tells me that's not true.
Yeah, that's honestly interesting. The Bears went and got DeAndre Swift this offseason. So already having Khalil Herbert and then drafting Roschon Johnson last year. So that's an interesting concept. I didn't think about it like that. You talked about his speed. Not being his speed's nothing special when it comes to Keon, but there's things that he does do really well, like the route running. People talk about him being excelling at. His size is one thing. So you mentioned a little bit, but do you think if Jordan Travis stayed healthy, we would have seen a 1,000-yard season?
I think he would have got 1,000 yards, because he would have had some big games down the stretch. They were playing Florida, they were playing Louisville to try to go all the way. They would have had, I think he would have put up some huge numbers. It only takes one big game for him to get those last 300 yards. And I think one of those games would have been a 200-yard game had Jordan Travis not. If Tate Rodemaker had not gotten hurt against Florida, I actually thought Florida State called a bad game in the first half because they were being too cautious. And then when they realized they were about to lose, they opened it up. And they won going away. So I can blame the staff for that a little bit. The thing about Coleman, if you watch during that gauntlet, after he ran the slow 40, he ran the fastest gauntlet, and he ran it in a straight line while he wasn't looking. That's the kind of stuff that he does that makes you go, no, wait a minute. You're not supposed to be able to do that. I mean, to run in a straight line at that speed and look like you're just jogging. Yeah, that is what I mean about him having just this athletic aura about him. And Taylor, I've seen you for years at Jaguar practices, and maybe even some when we had a visiting team. And the Jaguars may not have been very good. I think about the one year when Tampa was here, and I turned that corner, and everybody's optimistic that the Jaguars are going to be good. And then you turn that corner and you see Levante David, and you see Mike Evans, and you go, and Vita Vea, and you go, wait a minute, where they come from? Those are some pretty special looking people. Keon Coleman is one of those types. So if he ever gets the chance and he goes to the right team, I think he's going to be a really, really good player.
And it's an interesting thing for the Bears because they have picked 1 and 9, obviously 1 likely going for Caleb Williams. And that 9 is a question of they need wide receiver, edge, interior offensive line are the 3 biggest needs most people feel like, but they don't have a second round pick. So they don't pick again until the 3rd round. So a lot of people have this thing of, okay, well, if they pick at 9, then you have a long waiting area until you get to 3. But if you trade back, let's say a few spots, and you're able to get a 2nd round pick, that could be a scenario. Let's say they do trade back to 14, 15, take Jared Verse there, and then are able to take one of those next tier wide receivers, which a lot of people believe Keon Coleman's in that tier of wide receivers when it comes to this draft. But T-Wig, if not, let's say they wait until a 3rd. A guy you can get a little later in the 3rd or 4th round is the other wide receiver you talked about a little bit, Johnny Wilson. What do you think about him?
Johnny scares me a little bit in the NFL, and the reason why is because it's not his size. We've seen big receivers before. We saw Colin Johnson in Jacksonville a few years ago. He's about the same height, but
he was a Bear last year for a minute.
Yeah, and the thing with Johnny is Johnny will catch everything one week, and then the next week he'll drop the easiest passes. And a lot of wide receivers do that, but you ain't putting up with a 6'6", 225-pound dude dropping a slant that could have been a first down at a critical time. Yeah. So I think he's going to find a place to play in the NFL, but I think it's going to be one of those Mike Gesicki type situations where everybody's always going to be mesmerized with what his size is and what could be, but he's never going to quite live up to it. But he might get in a situation where he's like the 2nd tight end, and Johnny Wilson scores 4 touchdowns a year. But it seems like it's a whole lot more than that because the team is like really, really good. So Johnny becomes like a folk hero. But I think anybody looking at him to be a full-time starter and be their ex-receiver, they might be pinching off a little bit more than he can chew.
Yeah, and that's why I feel like some of the things that I've heard are similar to that. T-Wig, before I let you go, just because I feel like it was the big conversation this offseason, and I know you follow college football heavily, also in the NFL world too. Thoughts on departing with Justin Fields and thoughts on Caleb Williams coming to Chicago?
I understand it. Not very many people are ever put in a situation where they're able to do what the Bears did. It doesn't mean that kid can't play. And it doesn't mean that in the right situation, can he be a really, really good quarterback? We've seen quarterbacks get rebirth. I mean, we just saw Joe Flacco get one, right?
Baker Mayfield.
Right. And I'm waiting for Jameis Winston to get his opportunity at some point because I think he's going to get it turned around too because he's more mature. I really believe you can win with Justin Fields. I just think people believe it's more difficult to win with Justin Fields. And when you get a chance, and he would probably be a guy who they put a 5th-year option on and they wouldn't be looking to get away from because he's shown them enough to do that. But when you get this opportunity, the only other time I ever thought about it was the Dallas Cowboys. They got Troy Aikman. And then in the supplemental draft, they used the 1st-round pick on Steve Walsh, who Jimmy Johnson had coached in college. Well, Troy got hurt and they played Walsh enough that New Orleans gave Jimmy a real 1st-round pick for him and some other stuff, right? And they traded him. That's the only time I can ever remember where a team had to actually make a decision on a quarterback that I thought was pretty good because they had – and maybe the Kyler Murray situation, but most people thought the guy he replaced in Josh Rosen wasn't any good. I think people were a little bit higher on Justin Fields. The reason why y'all didn't get more compensation is just because I felt like everybody knew you had to get rid of him.
Yeah.
And people had already committed to other players.
Yeah, and I think they were Ryan Poles was holding out a little bit. He really wanted to put Justin in the situation that was going to benefit Justin, which ended up coming back and biting them a little bit. But do you think that Steelers with Mike Tomlin is a good place number 2 for him?
Yes, I do. It's been a while since the Steelers have had anybody that we think can play at the position. And now they have 2 guys that we know can play. Whether or not it's still at the Russell Wilson level that we remember, or if he can recapture that, and then Justin Fields sitting there for a year learning. Obviously, the Bears are the Steelers are going to pick up the 5th-year option. They didn't make a deal just to not make one, right?
Yeah.
Probably end up him making more money at some point than Russell Wilson, but at the end of the day, they got Russell Wilson basically for nothing this year because the Broncos have to pay him almost $40 million. So this gives him a chance to really, really put some sand in his pocket, batten down a little bit, calm down, take a deep breath, learn the Steeler way of doing things, and then just sit into that system and just go for it. They don't like changing quarterbacks a lot. They really don't like changing coaches. I like throwing this out anytime anybody lets me talk about the Steelers. I'll be 55 in 2 months. They've had 3 coaches my whole life. 3. And all of them have won Super Bowls. I'll be 55, Taylor, in 2 months. And they have had 3 coaches my whole life.
The Bears have had 3 since 2018. So
it's amazing. Amazing.
When you talked about Jameis Winston, I just had to say this as a side note because I used to be the biggest I don't like Jameis Winston person. His character development and life has been fantastic to watch because the amount that I actually root for Jameis Winston now, I was like, this man really made me change my whole perspective on him in a few years. And not even like football wise, but just like personality and who he is. He's a little goofy and quirky, but it's fun. He
to me, he's always been that way. It's just that I tell younger people this all the time. We all have contradictions inside of us. Which one do you want people to see? Mm-hmm. However you want to be perceived, that's how they're going to treat you. Therefore, Jameis Winston, in my opinion, has always been the most unintentionally funny person I've ever seen in my life. All of that stuff y'all laugh at, he ain't trying to make you laugh for real. But it's funny.
I know.
And what's funny about it is he ain't trying to make you laugh. Jameis Winston reminds me of Walt but he ain't selling crystal meth. Walt off Breaking Bad. It's just like you ain't really trying to be like that dude, but you can't help yourself. So that's what he is. He's just unintentionally somebody that people don't expect. And he's the kind of dude that if you don't like him, you hate him. But if you just sat back a little bit and watched him, you realize this joker is just as naive and as harmless as he wants to be. And maybe that's what got him in trouble before.
Yeah, honestly, maybe. And like you said, the maturity, you've seen the maturity level grow with him on certain levels. But I watched some interviews and I'm just like, man, and even flashback, going to your point of he's always been like that. There's been ones back when he was on the Bucks and like beginning early years where he's still doing just stuff where you're like, he is an individual character, but it is hilarious to me. And I've definitely grown to love Jameis Winston.
Yep.
All right,
maybe Jalen's next, right? Jalen, I'm just joking with you.
I don't know about that one. I don't know. I tried when he was a Jag. I truly tried, and it just never got there. But anyways, thanks to you, Wig, for hopping on with me. I really appreciate it. I know I've been very slamming the table of if Rome Odunze's not there, grab Jared Verse. I know it's not, maybe people think a little high for 9, but I personally, like you said, sometimes you have to grab that guy that you know fits your team that you have right now without having to adjust things. We saw in Jacksonville when it came to Trayvon Walker, and like they still feel like they don't really have a place. He definitely took a step up this last season, but that first year they were like, what do we do with him? Like, we got him, and he's massive and he's talented, but where do you put him? And I don't want the Bears to be in that situation because I feel like they're a little closer to contending. Yeah,
I think you'll be fine. He'll fit Eberflus. I think that's how you say his name.
Eberflus, yeah.
Eberflus or whatever, because I'll switch up a continent on you now here, right? So, but I think he'll fit that defense just fine. Eberflus is really a 4-3 guy.
Yeah,
sort of a base 4-3, a little bit base 4-2-5. I think Jared Verse would be a great pick. I think he'd be a great pick at 9. It'd even be better if you go back to 14 and end up with an extra 2 or an extra 3.
Yeah.
And you can then go get his buddy Braden Fisk maybe and bring him up there. Y'all really love him in Chicago. That's the dude right there, man. I'm telling you.
Is it?
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, and then I didn't really even mention it, but that's what you think would be one of the draft picks to take.
Yeah, man, he is. I'm telling you, if you remember Dan Williams, who played a long time as a defensive tackle for the Buffalo Bills, that's just who he is. He's funny. He's got a little bit of that Kelsey personality, not to mention the haircut, but he's funny, but he runs like the wind. And I just think of cities that would love these players, and Chicago is another one. I couldn't even imagine Braden Fiske playing in Chicago, and they would absolutely love him to death.
Well, we'll keep an eye on that then, like, because I feel like we're getting there. I mean, draft is right around the corner, so I'm excited. But again, thanks for hopping on with me. I appreciate it. Miss you around here. I'm sure I'll see you at camp at practices coming up too.
Absolutely, you will. And thank you very much for having me. I appreciate you. I'm a big fan, man. Do your thing, Taylor.
Thank you. Bye, Wig.